Welcome to Naranias. This is Chaitanya. In this daily news analysis, we have selected certain articles from the Hindu as well as Indian Express, and we'll analyze it in detail so that they are relevant for the examination. The articles that have been chosen are: Center's selective transfers appointments may trigger embarrassing outcomes, which is said by the Supreme Court. This is the rift between Supreme Court as well as executive, that is the central government, that there is selectivity in transfers. The transfer is actually the duty of the Supreme Court's collegium. Yet there is interference from the central government in one or the other form. So we'll go and look into the issue in detail and also analyze the role of the collegium. It is from the Hindu, page number 10. The second article, that is China's biggest security anxiety for India and Australia. In this, we try to focus on the relation between India and Australia and how China is one of the threat to both the countries and why it is one of the important reasons for close cooperation between India and Australia. It is from the Hindu, page number 1. Third is how free cancer care alone won't help the fight against cancer in India. Here we will try to examine the government measures, and despite the measures taken by the government, the cost incurred by the patients, that is cancer patients, is higher, sometimes pushing them into poverty. In this article, we'll look into the issues of the cancer patients and why out-of-pocket expenditure couldn't be brushed aside as a mere expense. It is from the Hindu, page number 9. Next is higher risk weight on unsecured loans is credit positive. The thing is that the unsecured loans in India are on the rise, and there is a worry that if it is not controlled, it could actually trigger a financial crisis in India, given the way the financial crisis has been observed in the world in 2008. This is from the Hindu, page number 10. The fifth one is energy burst in distant galaxy disturbed ionosphere. Here, an energy burst that ultimately led to gamma rays from a supernova explosion, which has been traveling for 2 billion light years, has been recently observed by one of the European observatory, and the impact it has on ionosphere has been explained in detail. This is from the Hindu, page number science column. Coming to the first article, it is with respect to the behavior of the government or the actions of the government and how Supreme Court has reacted to the way certain matters are dealt with. And the matters that we are talking is the transfer of the judges. As you know, the transfer of the judges in this country is to be done by the collegium system. And government has no role to play in transfer of the judges or even the appointment of the judges. What happens in India is Supreme Court collegium decides how to transfer the judges from one court to the other. We are not going into the composition of the collegium system here. We are simply trying to concentrate on the actions of the government and the reactions from the Supreme Court. At the same time, we will analyze why this is happening in the country. And one of the important reasons is government doesn't like the existing collegium system's composition, where the voice of the government has not been heard in terms of the way the matters are to be conducted, in terms of how the judiciary or the judicial system, judges are to be transferred, appointed, etc. The title of the article is Center's Selective Transfer Appointments May Trigger Embarrassing Outcomes. So Supreme Court has given it plain and clear that these sorts of behavior or actions from the government is not tolerable. The relevance of the topic is we'll be able to learn about the transfer of the judges and collegium system. We are not going to go into the composition of it, but its actions and the reactions. Syllabus, it is with regards to GS paper 2 and from it on the judicial related matter. Now let us look into the context. The context is the selective appointments and transfers done by the government, central government. Now, how was I able to quote central government here? Why? Because ultimately it is the actions of the government that is leading to the selectivity. The action of the government is to the president. Okay? Ultimately, the president's assent or approval is required. But in reality, as per the procedure, president has no rule. He has to simply sign whatever the order that is passed by the collegium. But indirectly, the central government is influencing the decisions taken by the collegium by selectively acceding to the demands and selectively avoiding certain directions provided by the collegium system. Collegium, as you know, as I already explained you, deals with the matters with regards to the judges of the country. Now, if there is selectivity, it is nothing but government is politically utilizing its power to see that certain judges who has certain sorts of ideological inclinations which are in favor or which align with the central governments are being favored, when the other judges who might not have the ideological inclination or who might not be in favor of the central governments are denied in terms of appointment or in terms of transfers, etc. Thus, manipulating how the judges are transferred, appointed, etc. So, what it might lead to is certain swearing in ceremonies of the judges might be delayed as well. Because if, for example, Collegium has recommended two names and these are to be approved by the president at any cost as per the established procedure, and if it is not done, then the swearing in ceremony of the second judge, who might have the acceptance of the president, will be delayed because the first judge is not appointed because of the selectivity. So this is one argument put forward by the Supreme Court, that similarly it could lead to delay in other aspects of functioning of the judiciary as well. If the judge's appointment to a particular court is delayed, then whatever the task that is to be undertaken by the judges will not be achieved or will not be completed as per the expected deadlines of that particular judiciary. Or as you know, there are multiple courts within India, that is High Court of AP, High Court of Telangana, etc., etc. What are the advantages and disadvantages of the collegium system? Again and again, we are stressing about the collegium system and why the central government is not acting as per the recommendations of the collegium system. One of the reasons is obviously collegium system constitutes only the judges of the country. It doesn't have the representative from executive or any other. There is no legislature. So what is happening is, this composition is not in favor of what government think is proper fit for appointment of the judges. But yet we are continuing with the collegium system. Okay, there is a history and background regarding how the collegium system has taken its form in the present. We need not go into that history. We'll simply look into the issues with the collegium system as well as advantages with the collegium system. Now let us look into the advantages of the collegium system. It is independent from the politics. In the NJAC case, National Judicial Appointment Commission case, which is also called as fourth judge case, Supreme Court has stated that the composition of NJAC will threaten judicial independence. The present judiciary is fierce in terms of protecting its autonomy. It is of the view that executive interference will ultimately lead to threatening the independence. If executive is interfering, obviously, the impartiality of the judiciary might be impacted, leading to taking the line of the executive or legislature, etc. Thus, it wants to be impartial, objective, and for it, it is fiercely protecting the autonomy. And thus, it has rejected National Judicial Appointment Commission to replace collegium system. And it increases secrecy. It is argued that the collegium system proceedings that occur, that is, how the collegium system's judges discuss among them regarding the judges, those are to be appointed or transferred, etc. These are generally not revealed to the public, and thus what happens is we could maintain secrecy in terms of the sensitivity involved in transferring judges or appointing a particular judges, etc. Next up is preventing transfer of judges. So there might be certain political understandings. For example, central or the state governments might not like or might not be in line with what the judgments are. In those points of time, there is a chance of influence from the central government or the state government. So what do we require at that point of time is impartiality, independence. And if the power ultimately rests with the collegium system, it becomes difficult for the interference from other bodies. Next, expertise in selection. Why? Because it is the judiciary who is ultimately involved in selection of the judges. Judiciary is nothing but the judges. The judges, as you know, have the proven track record in dealing with the cases and thus prosecution, etc. If this is the thing which is happening now, you could expect that the experts, which are nothing but the judges who are involved in these processes, as expertise is ensured. But there are disadvantages. How could we think that the judges who are appointing the judges are experts, or they are acting in impartial manner in terms of selection or appointment, etc.? That is one of the reasons why the collegium system is criticized again and again by not only executive but civil society, legislature, etc. That judges appointing judges is nothing but conflict of interest. So we are going to see certain disadvantages of the collegium system here. Firstly, it is not transparent. That is, whatever the proceedings, whatever the discussions or discourse that is being carried out in the collegium system is not made public. If it is not made public, we do not know exactly the sorts of discussions that are going on, the quality of the discussion, or whether a particular judge who is appointed is on account of so and so factors, the parameters that are taken into account for appointing a judges. We do not know any of it. If that is happening, how could one pose trust upon the system which is non-transparent? That is one question. Then the scope of nepotism and favoritism. Nepotism and favoritism, nothing but a judge who is a part of this collegium, he might influence the collegium to appoint a particular judge who might be his friend or might be his relative, etc. And many instances in the past have shown that the nepotism has been witnessed in the collegium system as well. If that is the case, it is a clear case of conflict of interest. Thus, bestowing power upon the collegium to do its bidding is not welcome or is not just. Next, it is undemocratic. Why it is undemocratic? Because ultimately it leads to tyranny of the judges. The power is solely focused in the judges. What we want instead is, we want the representation from diverse sections. That is why in NJSE we have brought in the perspective of not only the judiciary but also executive. We have brought in legislature, we have also brought in civil society. Yet we are not able to convince judiciary that this actually ensures independence. In reality, many of the countries have these sorts of system where the representation is not only from the judges but from other arenas as well. Next, there is no testing criteria, as we already seen, the parameters that are taken into account for appointing the judges. Thus, we actually do not know what are the sorts of qualities that are required to get appointed as a judge. Next, the burden on judiciary is going to rise. Already, we are seeing the pendency of cases which are at all-time high. And the Supreme Court has the additional duty to look into constitutionality of many legislations. It is not able to solve many issues. Yet, this added burden of appointing the judges will further take a toll. Next, streamlining judicial appointments. How to streamline judicial appointments and why we need to streamline judicial appointments. Firstly, for checks and balances. Why? Because there is no proper checks and balances in appointment of the judges. Bringing in the perspective of executive judiciary is important. That is why memoranda of procedure which has been forwarded by the government to actually reform the way appointments are done is to be taken into account. Okay? Improving the appointment procedure by also taking into consideration the views of the executive is important. Executive wishes to have a thorough background check of the judges that are to be appointed and also criteria that has to be clearly, explicitly stated so as to improve the appointment process. The Law Commission actually recommended equal participation from both the judiciary and the executive in the selection and appointment procedure. Thus, these recommendations are to be taken into account rather than brushing them aside as the recommendations of the executive, leading to the possibility of impacting the independence of the judiciary. And what we could also do is we could broaden the eligibility criteria, right? The eligibility criteria should not be simply restricted to or shouldn't be simply the case that are decided by the collegium system. We have to elaborate or we have to look into more options. Like for example, the person who has thorough judicial knowledge. Next, the diversity. We have to see that there is diversity in the collegium system or whichever body that is formed to appoint judges. For example, including women, civil society, etc. Then, enhancing transparency is the must. As we already seen, that transparency actually leads to generation of trust among the citizens. So in this way, we could reform and improve the trust. Thus, in this way, we could reduce the rift that arises or occurs again and again between the executive and the judiciary. And thus, both could work in horizon despite having opposition in views among the judges of the Supreme Court, and thus move forward as a country. Now let us look into another article. This article deals about the relationship between India and Australia. China is one of the biggest security concerns for both the countries, given its presence in the South China Sea as well as its adventures into the Indian Ocean, where it's trying to influence various countries to checkmate India. And Australia's closeness to the United States is also a worry to the China. Thus, this attitude from the China and its strategic worries with Australia, etc., is one of the reasons for the increasing collaboration between Australia and India. So there is a need for us to understand about Australia-India relations thoroughly and why we could consider that it is one of the solid one. The title is China is the biggest security anxiety for India and Australia. So what are we going to learn from it? The 2+2 dialogue, which is now continuing its session, and India-Australia relations. So these will be our main focus from this article, rather than strictly confining ourselves to know about the China and its impacts on India and Australia. The syllabus, GS Paper 2, bilateral, regional, global groupings, and agreements involving India and or affecting India's interests. All these topics are pretty much covered under this article. The context is second India-Australia 2+2 ministerial dialogue are being held in New Delhi. One of the reasons they are being held is to improve or step up defense cooperation and deepen the strategic relationship that both the countries have. This itself is an indication that we are trying to deepen our relationship with Australia, especially in sensitive arenas like defense as well as strategic relationship, which covers pretty much all aspects between both the countries in terms of economy, environment, etc. So we'll see why we could say that Australia is one of the important allies. The 2+2 ministerial dialogue is a high-level dialogue that occurs at the ministerial level between two countries. India has opened this form of engagement with only select few countries in the world. This itself is an indication that we are giving or we are prioritizing Australia as one of the important allies to carry forward the relationship in a positive manner. 2+2, as the name itself suggests, it will be an engagement between two ministers from India and two ministers from Australia, and it is between defense ministers of India, then defense minister from Australia, and similarly foreign minister, that is Ministry of Foreign Affairs from India and Australia. And as I said already, that we have only select few countries with which India has this form of dialogue. These are United States, Russia, Australia, Japan. So this shows the closeness of engagement. Now let us look into India-Australia relationship. Let us start from the historical engagement. Our relationship with Australia has the foundation in the pre-independence era itself, given in the year 1941. Despite our country being under the colonial occupation, we have started engagement with Australia. Of course, that was done by the British regime who was head, or he was, of course, that was by the Britishers who was ruling India at that point of time. And one of the important reasons for importance of relationship is Indians being the second largest migrants of Australia. This is shown by the census 2021. We have strategic partnership with Australia, which has been upgraded in the year 2020 as special strategic partnership. We already seen about the strategic partnership in the initial slides. Then the Civil Nuclear Transfer to India Bill 2016. This is one of the important acts passed by the Australian Parliament. Why it is important? Because the energy supply or production of energy is one of the important issue faced by India. India still relies heavily on the coal imports for production of electricity, and it wants to diversify its imports through which it could produce energy. One of the ways to diversify energy is to import nuclear fuels, that is uranium, etc., etc. Australia is one of the important supplier of this fuel. Australia has passed a legislation which guarantees the export of nuclear fuels to India. Okay, Australia to fulfill contracts to supply Australian uranium to India. So this shows the trust that the Australia poses on India, and thus this is leading to the trade between India and Australia in terms of uranium. Next, India conducts various exercises, that is joint exercises, and nothing but the collaboration at the military level. It might be between Air Force of India and Air Force of Australia, etc., etc. This is to improve collaboration and so as to enable both the defense forces to work in unison in the time of attack in the future years, if that is possible. Of course, we don't have any defense alliance like the NATO with Australia. We don't know what might arise in the future. The exercises are Oz Index, Kakadu, Pitch Black. Trade and commerce. India is the sixth largest trading partner with Australia. And the bilateral trade between India and Australia has increased from US $22.2 billion in 2021 to $31.4 billion in 2022. And it has registered a growth of 41%. So the trade engagement is increasing day by day. 2018, Australia has launched a special program so as to utilize its ability to use the expertise of Australia in certain arenas of economic engagement. For example, education. So what it wants to do is it wants to collaborate with India and utilize its expertise to see that it could improve the economic relations between India and Australia, while Australians do their business in India through this engagement. So in 2018, Government of Australia has commissioned India Economic Strategy to 2035 plan to tap the potential of India's growth, economic growth. Next, in 2021, we have formally launched India-Australia Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. And this is important because we are again and again trying to have a free trade agreement with the developed economies. Australia is the first country with which we have such engagement. Developed country. Among the developed countries, that is what I am talking about or stressing about. The benefits of India is export concessions, right? The exports from India will attract lesser duties from Australia. Thus, our goods competitiveness will increase and our ability to sell our goods in Australian market will be higher. And it has been shown that it will benefit close to 96% of India's exports. And then opportunities for Australia as well. What opportunities lie ahead to Australia due to this engagement is India's diverse and growing economy will provide enough market to Australia's businesses so that they could earn money, as I already explained you, a special strategy started by Australia in the year 2016. And what they will be able to capture or take benefit of is from education, agriculture, energy, tourism, healthcare and innovation, where the expertise of Australia is better or higher. It is not in comparison with India, but I'm saying that their potential is higher. Next, the regional groupings in which both India and Australia are part of. While writing the answers, it is necessary for us to see the collaboration between the countries in the regional grouping. The Quad is one of the important grouping where Australia and India, along with the United States and Japan, play a major role in shaping the way the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific region are shaped. Thus, countering China, Quad is an important platform to discuss on the risks posed by the attitude of China in this region and how both this country along with the partners could avert the crisis. Next, Indian Ocean Rim Association. It is to promote sustainable development in the Indian Ocean region, as the name suggests. Then Supply Chain Resilience Initiative. It is to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. We want to see that the supply chains are resilient enough rather than being dependent on China. As we have seen in the COVID years, our dependence on China has led to the shortfalls in various commodity exports and imports among various countries due to the constraints in the China. What countries are now trying to do is to reduce the reliance on China. One of such initiatives is SCRI, and it is an initiative by India and Australia along with the Japan. Thus, a trilateral SCR arrangement is being. Now, let us look into why Australia is important. Now, let us look into why Australia is important to India. We have already seen various factors that leads to the close collaboration between India and Australia. Now, let us repeat one by one. Strategic partnership, as I already explained you, which has been upgraded to special strategic partnership in the year 2020. And why it is important? Why? Because the 40% of the global trade occurs through the route of Indian Ocean, where Australia too has its stake because of its presence in Indian Ocean, and even Chinese goods travel or navigate through this route, thus giving us enough scope to counter China in the future by blocking this path or by maintaining that both both the countries as well as rest of the world is able to freely navigate. Next is economic cooperation. We have already seen the rising economic engagement in terms of trade, then energy security, given the imports of coal and uranium as well. We have dealt about the uranium imports, but we also import heavily from Australia with regards to the coal source. Next, the multilateral cooperation through multilateral engagements in terms of G20, UN, ASEAN, etc. We see generally that the voice of both the countries is almost same. Next is promoting democratic values. As both the countries are democratic in nature, their essence or their importance given to certain issues like freedom of speech or democratic polity or human rights, etc., play paramount role. Thus, they try to promote these values in the international arena as well. Now, let us look into China and the impact that China has on both relations between India and Australia and India and China, Australia and China. Firstly, China's assertiveness in South China Sea is one of the important thorn that is leading to the collaboration between India and Australia. The artificial islands being built by China in the South China Sea, as you know, is a cause of worry to Australia. Why? Because these travel from the north of Australia, and thus that ultimately leads to the belligerent attitude of China through the usage of navies, trying to demonstrate its strength to not only the countries which are in South China Sea, but also Australia, which is thus trying to collaborate with other partners. At the same time, both India and Australia are supporting freedom of navigation. This has become an important worry. Why? Because of the attitude of China. China is not allowing countries to freely navigate through the water because China is claiming those waters. Then added to it, we have Belt and Road Initiative of China, through which it wants to enhance infrastructure by collaborating with other countries like Pakistan or even in the Pacific Island, Indian Ocean Island, etc., through the use of debt trap diplomacy. And through these engagements, China is expanding its footprint. This is ultimately impacting India's ability to influence other countries, to counter China's strategic hold over various countries. Now let us look into another article. This article deals with the cancer care in India. With the growing cases of cancers in India and it being one of the leading causes for the deaths, there is a need for increasing assistance to especially the people who are in need and incurring heavy expenses on account of relieving themselves from the cancer issue. The title of the article is How Free Cancer Care Alone Won't Help the Fight Against Cancer in India. As the name itself suggests, free cancer care is not enough. We are thinking that certain insurance schemes or certain incentives provided by the governments at the center as well as state will provide assistance to the poor, but there are other hidden costs, psychological impacts as well on the families, where the members of the family are suffering from cancer and their treatment is leading financial troubles. So this article will try to explain the troubles that they are facing. At the same time, the government measures that are targeted to reduce the cost paid or reduce the cost borne by the family members. The relevance of the topic, increasing burden on non-communicable diseases in India, and Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which is an insurance scheme which provides relief, paying the bills of the cancer patients. UPSC syllabus GS2 Social Justice. Coming to the context, alarming growth of cancer. So, one estimate shows that by 2040, close to 20 lakh people of India could be diagnosed with cancer. So, the incidence of cancer in India could rise to such a level. Already what we have seen is, now cancer is the third leading cause of the death. That in itself is an alarming issue. And then, in the coming years, it is going to overtake heart attacks, which is one of the leading cause of deaths in India. Thus, this necessitates increasing health facilities for cancer patients. What it is leading to is exorbitant financial loss. A survey has shown that despite the government measures, we are witnessing that close to 80% and more are still incurring expenses in curing themselves from cancer. Added to it, it is driving them to poverty. And impoverishment among the patients has been seen to close to 60% of the people. The financial burden that we are talking about here is as follows. Firstly, high out-of-pocket expenditure. It is nothing but we are spending the money of our own, that is, out of our pocket for cancer treatment. How we are incurring expenses is using the private sector as a medium for treatment. Despite the government measures, we are still seeking private sector due to the following reasons. Like for example, even to take MRI scan in Delhi, in public hospitals, the report that we are going to get back, the time taken is 2 years. It's far higher. Even to diagnose cancer, the reports provided by the public centers is taking time. This will ultimately impact our ability to fight back or fight the cancer. The patients who are trying to get the treatment from the hospitals. So this delay in public health centers as well is leading to the increasing spending. And then loss of livelihood, because obviously if the breadwinner of the family is being impacted by this cancer, then his ability to earn money is going to take a hit. Added to it, if the breadwinner is trying to see that one of the family members is to be provided treatment, then he has to incur expenses, impacting significantly on the financial well-being of the particular family. Then the migration cost added to it. Why? Because most of the health centers are present in the urban centers. If that is the case, then the villagers who doesn't have that sorts of facilities in their villages need to migrate to the urban centers. Why? Because it is because we cannot expect them to travel up and down again and again. And cancer treatment generally requires a longer stay at the hospitals. Thus, they try to settle down in the urban centers. Still, they will be able to overcome the cancer issue. Thus, all these are adding the financial burden on the patients. Then now let us look into the government measures. The government measures are as follows. National Cancer Control Program, as the name itself suggests, it provides treatment to the cancer. How it will do is it will register the cases, it will collect the data, it will analyze the data and research and policy making, so as to make policies which enable us to resolve the present issue that we are facing in terms of cancer. One more scheme, National Program for Prevention and Control of Cancer, Diabetes, Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke. So this program has encompassed various aspects to deal with the cancer. For example, the human resources to improve the ability to cater to the cancer patients, diagnosis centers. Next, insurance coverage. We have Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. This is an important initiative by the government to make healthcare affordable, and it provides insurance coverage up to rupees 5 lakh per family per year. So this could be used for cancer treatment as well, because it has been included within the scheme. And the other schemes are National Tobacco Control Program, as the name itself suggests, it wants to control the tobacco usage in India. And what it will do is it will spread awareness among the population regarding the ill effects of the tobacco consumption, thus reducing the consumption and in turn controlling the cancer which is spread through the tobacco consumption. Next, the infrastructure measures like providing transport facilities, reducing the transportation costs, etc. The government established regional cancer centers so as to enable citizens to diagnose the cancer and provide treatment. Then conducting screening camps, as the name itself suggests, it wants to see that we could diagnose. Diagnosis is the key to treat patients who are suffering from cancer. And we have state government measures as well that the Delhi has launched Arogya Kosh scheme. This is to reduce the burden on the public health centers and avoid treatment delays. So what it does is it will also empanel private hospitals so as to take care of the cancer patients. Thus, in this way, it will reduce the burden on the public health centers. As we already seen in the earlier case that the public health infrastructure is not enough to provide timely care, and it is leading to the delays which ultimately impacts our ability to treat the cancer patients. The other measures are national cancer grid. As the name itself suggests, it is a grid connected to various entities or facilities. In this case, what it tries to do is it tries to connect various organizations or research centers so as to share data and resources so as to enable them to conduct collaborative research. Then we have travel concessions, through which travel concessions are extended are through Indian Railways and Air India also. They are providing travel concessions, nothing but reducing the price of the travel costs. In 2012, Haryana government has made public transport free through the public vehicles who are suffering from cancer. Then further the measures are the financial support given by Haryana, Tripura and Kerala. What they have established is the cancer pension to be provided to the cancer patients, which is at the rate of rupees 2,500 per month in Haryana and rupees 1,000 per month in Tripura and Kerala. The services at concessional rates. Delhi government is providing them to the residents of the Delhi, where they could avail the benefit of the scheme under which ultrasound, CT scans, etc. could be utilized by the cancer patients to the tune of rupees 3 lakh per year of costs incurred by the patients. So in this way, government is taking measures to control or to reduce the burden being faced by the patients. Yet we have seen that time and again, this is not enough. We have to see that the comprehensive care is to be extended to the people because the out-of-pocket expenditure is quite high and the costs which are invisible to the government should also be compensated. Then we could find a way to actually reduce the burden. Now let us look into another article. This article is on RBI's tightening of regulations on the banks as well as non-banking financial companies with regards to the loans that have been forwarded to the consumer segment. This is nothing but high credit risks. The credit that has been extended to the consumers is of highest credit because there is high chances of it becoming a liability to the banks. Depending upon the risks, the extent of regulations are imposed by central banks of various countries. We need to reduce the risk so as to see that the financial system is stable. So in this article, what we are going to see is the instruments that are used by Reserve Bank of India to reduce the risks in the banking operations as well as non-banking financial company operations in India, and thus we'll come to realize why there is a need to actually impose more burden upon the banks when they carry out risky activities of extending loans to the consumers. The title of the article is RBI's strengthening step of financial prudence and stability. And the relevance of the topic, RBI's prudential norms. That is RBI's regulatory initiatives so as to see that our financial system is stable. The syllabus, GS Paper 3, Indian Economy and Issues, as well as mobilization of resources, growth, development, because Indian enterprises depend upon the banks for carrying out their operations. Generally, it is not that bank is the only channel through which they get the credit, but their dependence on banks for getting the credit facilities is higher. So, maintaining the proper health of the banking system is important for the economic development of the country. The title of the article is RBI's strengthening step of financial prudence and stability. And the relevance of the topic, RBI's prudential norms. That is RBI's regulatory initiatives so as to see that our financial system is stable. The syllabus, GS Paper 3, Indian Economy and Issues, as well as mobilization of resources, growth, development, because Indian enterprises depend upon the banks for carrying out their operations. Generally, it is not that bank is the only channel through which they get the credit, but their dependence on banks for getting the credit facilities is higher. So, maintaining the proper health of the banking system is important for the economic development of the country. The context obviously is the increasing risks that we are witnessing in our country on account of high consumer credit take. That is, consumer credit is rising. And this is leading to high riskiness. So what RBI has done is, has increased the risk weight. We are going to see what happens if RBI increases risk-weighted measures. That is, for example, if 100 rupees is being given as a credit to consumers, if RBI says that you have to set aside close to 15% of the money that you have given as a credit to the consumer as provision. Why? Because why we are keeping aside the money is to see that in the future, if there is a possibility of the consumer's inability to repay the debt that they have taken from the bank, we could use this money to cover or reduce the possibility of losses. This is what we call it as risk provisioning. What it ultimately leads to is extending loans to consumers becomes costly. That is, banks or NBFCs, non-banking financial companies, who are involved in the business of extending loans to the consumers will find it costlier to give more and more loans to the consumers through the measures taken by the Reserve Bank of India. Here, by increasing the risk provisioning ratio. What happens ultimately is, through this measure, we could reduce the risks involved in our financial system. Right? So in this way, RBI tries to reduce the risks and see that our financial system is in a healthy state. So the measures taken by the RBI are as follows. As I said, the risk provisioning ratio has been increased. What RBI has done is, the commercial banks and the NBFCs, that is non-banking financial companies who are in the business of extending loans, it has increased the risk by 25 percentage points. What this ultimately led to is the total of 125%. So this is an indication that the risk-weighted nature of the loans that is to be considered by the banks in terms of setting aside a part of the money to cope up with the possible losses in the future has been risen. And this risk weights on the bank's exposure, and this has been done to the NBFCs as well. That is the context of the article. Next, we'll look into Basel III norms. Why we are looking into Basel III norms is to understand why is there a need for increasing regulations on the banks, tightening the regulations on the banks. See, Basel III norms was conceived after the financial crisis that we have observed in the year 2008. 2008 global financial crisis has its origin in United States of America. But because of the globalization and the US's interconnect with the rest of the world, all countries have witnessed its influence. Now, why are we stating 2008 financial crisis here? Why? Because in 2008 financial crisis, subprime crisis is the prime reason for triggering of the global level financial crisis. Subprime crisis, nothing but it deals with subprime loans. It is like similar to extending consumer loans. And here the consumer wants to buy homes, so we could also call it as home loan crisis as well. Banks have relentlessly extended home loans to the consumer without clearly taking a prudent measure of doing a background check whether these people will be able to repay the loan in the future or not. What happened? The risks piled up and there came a point where the consumers were not able to repay the loans. The ultimate burden will be now faced by the banks because they are not able to get back the money that they have extended to the consumers. Why banks are interested to extend loans despite knowing that the risks are high? Why? Because the returns or the interest rates charged on the subprime borrowers is higher. So in their greediness, banks extended loans. That is what we are witnessing even in India. If we don't stop or if we don't reduce the amount of risks that the banks are carrying out on account of this lending, this will ultimately haunt India and impact its financial stability. That is why this measure is important. So, what Basel III norms basically does is, it will try to reduce the risks by attaching risks to various parameters. Okay, we'll see the bank has so and so risk on the basis of parameters like the extent of credit that it has given to its consumers. It might be prime consumer, it might be subprime consumer. Prime consumer generally refers to the businesses, firms, etc., which are highly likely to repay the loan when compared to the subprime borrowers. So, on the basis of credit risks, on the basis of market risk, etc., we attach risks. Basis of attachment of risks, we say that you have to set aside some part of the money so as to cover those losses if they might arise in the future. So the recent measure that RBI has taken is to comply with the Basel III norms. But the Basel III norms has certain level of expectations in terms of provisioning of loans. But Indian regulators have, that is, Indian regulator, the RBI, has higher requirement, that is, higher provisioning ratio. And capital adequacy ratio is the ratio bank's capital is to be set aside in relation to its risk-weighted assets and current liabilities. Here, assets here generally refer to the loans extended by banks. If bank gives a loan to a consumer, it becomes an asset. Why? Because they're earning returns in terms of interests. But there is risk associated to it, as we already seen. And current liabilities, nothing but bank have to repay these liabilities, business losses or other losses. And within the liabilities, the deposits are also considered liabilities. Why? Because the deposits that consumer deposits in the bank is also a liability, because it has to give away the deposited money to the consumer. So this capital adequacy ratio is decided by central bank. Okay, and depending upon that, banks has to set aside the capital. The requirement of the Basel III is capital adequacy ratio of 8%, but presently the capital adequacy ratio of the India, which is decided by RBI, is 9%, whereas it is higher for the public sector banks, which are owned by the banks, which are owned by Government of India, and this is 12%. So this is healthy. Next, what is the importance of RBI's measure? Why? Because of the recent trends that we are witnessing in Indian economy. Consumer spending in itself is not an issue to us. The spending is increasing also on account of the increasing risk associated with high borrowing done by the consumers. The consumers are taking loans from the banks and increasing their consumer expenses. As we already seen, if there arises a point where they will not be able to repay, it might trigger a financial crisis situation in India. If you look at the data, it shows that the retail credit has risen, but the retail credit has grown higher in terms of consumer loans, where it is 23% rise, whereas in other segments the rise is only 12 to 14%. So unsecured retail credit is rising, which we need to curb. Then the high growth seen in consumer credit has a contagion effect. Why? Because NBFCs, non-banking financial companies, are generally dependent upon commercial banks for their loans. That is, NBFCs borrow the money from commercial banks And NBFCs use this money to extend loans to the consumers. And if consumers are not able to pay the money that they have borrowed, NBFCs will be in losses. If NBFCs are in losses, then ultimately this risk will spread to commercial banks. Thus, commercial banks could also witness losses on account of the business activities of the non-banking financial companies. So this is nothing but a contagion effect. This was given by Monetary Policy Committee that there is a need to curb such activities. And for that, the risk weights and the provisioning for the risk weights is essential. That is what the measure taken by RBI. This completes the article. Now let us look into another article. This article deals with the energy that burst from the distant galaxy and impacted the ionosphere of the Earth. This energy is due to supernova explosion. We are going to see what this energy is and how this impact on the ionosphere and how it will impact the ecosystem of the Earth. The title of the topic is Energy Burst in Distant Galaxy Disturbed Ionosphere. The relevance will be able to learn ionosphere as well as gamma rays. Syllabus GS Paper 3 Science and Technology. The context. The context is the energy released in terms of gamma rays from the distant galaxy. These gamma rays are the highest in terms of energy in the spectrum. Imagine the burst happening 2 billion light years away, yet impacting Earth. The duration of the impact is as follows. It has impacted for us close to 13 minutes on October 9, 2022. And one of the observatories was able to pick up impact on the ionosphere. If you look at the cycle of stars, that is evolution, initially from the nebula, depending upon the mass of the nebula, it could either transform as high mass stars or low and medium mass stars. Sun comes under the category of low mass stars, that is low and medium mass stars. If you look at the evolution cycle, the high mass stars will turn out to be red supergiants and then into a supernova. Then it will get exploded because of the exhaustion of the fuel. The fuel here is nothing but the hydrogen, which is what happens to the hydrogen is due to nuclear fusion. There is excessive release of energy. If the fuel is low, then its ability to sustain as a star is lower, and thus what happens is due to the reactions within the star, it gets exploded, and that explosion also leads to two possibilities depending upon the mass. A high mass star will be transforming itself into a neutron star, whereas a very high mass star could transform into a black hole. Here, what we are referring to is the explosion that occurs to the supernova, which led to the release of gamma rays. And this has intense energy. And this intense energy obviously could impact the ionosphere. Ionosphere which has ions in it. And the impact of this energy will disturb the electric field. Electric field depends upon the extent of electrons and protons. At the same time, the ions. And this energy impacts the ions, atoms, etc. and thus disturb the electric field which is suitable to Earth. That is, the inhabitants of the Earth, the ecosystem, etc. Thus, any change in the ionosphere will ultimately impact our ecosystem. The ionosphere's electric field changes, etc. We'll also look into the impact due to this disturbance in detail. Now let us look into the mechanism. As we have seen, gamma ray bursts, and this is from supernova explosion, which will ultimately impact the ionosphere. And how it will impact? Due to the process of ionization, because the ions are impacted due to the ionization energy potential of the gamma rays. Like for example, if you have atom, and this is the electron, this is the proton and neutron, which together refer to as nucleus, what happens is the energy from the gamma rays leads to the electron which revolves around the nucleus being disposed. Why? Because the energy absorbed by electrons leads to excitement in the states, and this excitement in orbital ultimately leads to lessening or weakening of the ability of the nucleus to hold on to it. And thus what happens is it leads to release of electrons, at the same time ultimately impacts the electric field. Now let us look into what ionosphere is all about. Ionosphere is surrounding the Earth from 50 to 900 kilometers above the surface. As the name itself suggests, it is composed of ionized gas. Thus, it has electrons which are stripped from atoms and molecules. As we already seen in the previous slide, that electrons are stripped from the atom on account of the energy of the gamma rays. Ionosphere is responsible for many functions, which are reflecting radio waves. The ionosphere which surrounds the Earth provides a medium through which the radio waves that are transmitted from the ground will get reflected once it hits the ionosphere. And thus it will enable us to transmit radio signals. Then it protects us from harmful radiations like UV radiations and X-rays by absorbing it, which produces aurora borealis and aurora australis. They provide us stunning visuals because of the lights that are emitted on account of the reaction between both. And these rays could be anything. These rays could be gamma rays, these rays could be cosmic rays, etc., that come from the space. And the origin could be anything from stars, etc., even from the suns. The consequence of the impact, it will disturb the ionosphere, as I already explained to you. The composition will be disturbed on account of the excessive release of electrons, etc., ultimately impacting the electric field. This will lead to the disruptions in communications in the future. Why? Because we are dependent upon the ionosphere. We may also see the impact on the ability of ionosphere to absorb ultraviolet radiations. It will also possibly trigger lightning that we generally see during the rainstorms, and this impact, that is, this interaction could also lead to the possibility of thunder and lightning. And auroral displays, as we already seen. So these are the possible impacts upon the ionosphere. So what is the scientific insight that we are going to get through making observations on these bursts? The first is, we could understand the distant events. As we have seen, this is on account of the supernova explosion. Thus, by observing these radiations, we could understand the composition, the properties of the supernova, ultimately understanding the cycle of the stars, especially which has higher mass. Next, ionosphere sensitivity. We will be able to check the sensitivity of ionosphere, the extent to which it could tolerate the future events. Or let us say in the near distant future, we could see the possibility that within our Milky Way galaxy, there could be a possibility of explosions leading to the gamma rays impacting the ionosphere. Next, the long distance impacts here, because we already seen that it was 2 billion light years away. We'll be able to assess what could happen. It also shows that whatever that is happening in the distant galaxies has an ability to impact ionosphere as well. Now let us look into another article. Now let us look into certain prelims practice questions. The questions that have been framed on the knowledge that we have shared until now through the discussions of the articles. Consider the following statements. Both India and Australia are members of Asia Pacific Economic Council. This is false. India is not a member, whereas Australia is a member. India maintains 2+2 ministerial dialogue with Australia, US, South Korea, and Japan. This is false. Why? Because India doesn't maintain 2+2 dialogue with South Korea. Now, which of the following statements are correct? The answer is D, none. With respect to Rashtriya Arogya Nidhi, which of the following statement is not correct? It is a central sponsored scheme. It is actually a central sponsored scheme. Applicable only to below poverty section. This is true. Scheme provides for one-time financial assistance to patients who are suffering from life-threatening disease. This too is true. It is an important scheme to cure the ailment, that is the life-threatening diseases. Thus provides financial assistance to the poor especially. So as all the statements are true, the answer is none of the above. That is D. Consider the following statement with regards to ionosphere. We have already seen ionosphere in dealing with the interaction with the supernova explosion that led to the gamma ray burst, which is a crucial layer of Earth's atmosphere that plays a vital role in various natural phenomena. Now, with regards to ionosphere, reflecting radio waves enabling long distance communication. This is true, as we already seen. Radio communication is possible through the presence of ionosphere, shielding us from harmful solar radiation, including ultraviolet UV, that is UV rays and X-rays. This too is true. Generating the aurora borealis and aurora australis. This too is true. As all the statements are true, the answer is C. Now, let us consider the following statements regarding Basel III norms. Basel III norms issue guidelines for credit risk, market risk, and operational risk. As we have already seen that on the basis of certain parameters, we try to assign risks that a bank is facing in terms of its operations. It might be extension of loans, giving credit facilities, that is loans, at the same time borrowing, and other business activities. So on that basis, we assign risks, and thus on that basis, we try to see that certain provisioning is done by the banks. So this is true. Next is capital to risk weighted asset ratio mandate higher provisioning for public sector banks than other scheduled commercial banks. So this is actually a policy of the RBI. Try to see that our public sector banks are of sound financial health. This too is true. So the answer is, which among the above statement is or are not correct? So the answer is none of the above, D. Now let us look into a mains question. In the light of recent caution by the Supreme Court to the government on selective transfers and appointments of judges, analyze the requisite reforms to streamline judicial appointments. The reforms. So firstly, in the introduction, you could mention the comment given by the Supreme Court that this sorts of actions of the executive will actually impact the ability of judiciary to function efficiently. So this could be mentioned as an introduction. Then coming to the body, you have to mention the ways through which we could reform the judiciary. For that, we could see that we could involve both executive and judiciary so that they could both come together and frame a body that have composition which could represent the voice of both. And we have already seen that we could also expand the diversity by involving legislature and even civil society as well. This will actually generate confidence and promote cooperation between executive and judiciary as well. And expanding eligibility criteria, that is the qualifications required to appoint judges, etc. We have to expand so that we could bring more academic expertise, and that too in diverse sections among the judges. Open applications for judicial vacancies. We should actually clearly state the vacancies available in the High Court as well as the Supreme Court to bring more talent, imperative representation of women, to bring diversity, especially given the lack of gender diversity in the collegium system as well as in the judiciary, especially at the higher level. The conclusion, there is a need for urgency to streamline judicial appointments. Why? Because the present system is not in consonance with the expectations of the executive as well as the recommendations of the Law Commission of India. So this completes the discussion for today. Please do like, share and subscribe our channel. Thank you.